So you've taken your BCAAs to stay anabolic. You've programmed your training to build dry muscle. You've eaten during your post-workout anabolic window, and you've taken your L-carnitine for fat loss, but you still have questions. James, please give us more science. I'm going to give you something that's actually genuinely useful for you, and something that hasn't been distorted through the bias and dollar bill filter of YouTube fitness. And it's called cluster sets. And cluster sets, like anything else, it's just something that somebody thought of and created. But actually, there is good science behind some of the benefits that cluster sets can give you. And so what are cluster sets? Well, very simply, they are working sets where you program short rest periods within the set. The rest period can vary from anywhere really from 15 to 30 seconds. And in my opinion, cluster sets are more useful for lower rep ranges with a higher percentage of 1 repetition max, or a higher RPE or repetitions model, or number of repetitions, whatever repetition programming you are using. And the reason for that is they are highly related to performance and power, and it is the lower rep ranges which are conducive to power. And so I can't give you an exact rest interval for your cluster sets, but obviously the more intensely you're working, the heavier the weight, the more you might have that rest. But it's very important that you program just enough rest to keep that state of tension, but to also allow a short recovery. Now, if you're giving yourself a 1-minute rest within a cluster set, that's not a cluster set, that's a set break. If you're giving yourself 15 seconds, then that's conducive with a cluster set. Now, for example, if you're deadlifting, you may deadlift for 6 reps, you may perform 2 reps, have 15 seconds break, another 2 reps, 15 seconds break, and then your last 2 reps. And so you have this benefit of giving yourself a short recovery time where you can therefore perform the next repetition with real power and specifically velocity. And so of course you can use cluster sets to build muscle for hypertrophy. Variation can be extremely useful. As I always say, change equals adaptation. However, it is really with the increase in power and specifically velocity that cluster sets can be really useful for you. And so what is velocity? Well, in very simple terms, it's the rate at which an object changes position. In this case, the rate at which you are moving that barbell during a deadlift or an overhead press. And when you're performing these cluster sets, I really want you to focus on the velocity of which you are moving that bar with each repetition. Don't just go through the motions. Make sure you consciously take advantage of the mini rest interval during your cluster set. And make sure you are conscious for each repetition to lift that bar with velocity. And Dr. Eddie Joe had a really nice infographic where he explains this. And he says that power as a function of force times velocity may be optimally improved when each training rep is performed with or close to peak velocity. During a traditional set, velocity may decrease with continuous repetitions due to acute fatigue, and thus the later reps may likely be performed with slow velocities. However, he then talks about cluster sets. And interestingly, he says, for example, instead of performing 6 sets of 6 continuous repetitions, one may split each set into 3 subsets of 2 reps with about 30 seconds rest in between each subset. This way, each repetition may be performed with greater velocity. And there is science to back up this potential benefit of cluster sets. And here is one such study in 2018. And the cluster set developed a superior development of muscular power. And so you really do have the potential with cluster sets, with giving yourself these small breaks, to really focus on velocity and therefore over time increasing your power, which is very important for performance. And Christian Thibaudeau, I am getting better at saying that name, also talks about the benefits of cluster sets. And he gives 2 real benefits of using cluster sets. And the first one is it allows you to perform more work at a given weight. Again, because you have those mini breaks to give yourself some form of recovery. And secondly, he talks about the fact that you are able to recruit type 2 muscle fibers. Now, before the fake Merc jumps in and attacks me for talking about muscle fibers, Christian Thibaudeau is one of the best strength and conditioning coaches on the planet. And he doesn't just talk about the fact that you can recruit these type 2 muscle fibers. He also talks about the fact that it's important to fatigue them, and that these cluster sets where you can use a relatively heavy weight can have great benefits for recruiting those motor units. And why is that? Well, it goes back to Thibodeau's point 1, and he specifically programs for performance, and this is his programming. And he says you can use 85 to 95% of your maximum, which is usually your 5 repetition max. The total reps per set are kept low to moderate, 4 to 6, and the rest between repetition is about 10 seconds. And so really what I want you to do is think about this idea of introducing cluster sets if you would like a slight change to your training. The benefits are specifically related to power development and velocity. And when it comes to the specific programming, only you can know that. Only you can be honest with and understand how you lift and how much brake you use. I recently performed deadlifting with cluster sets, and I found that 15 seconds was very effective for me. And so this was a quick one. I'm James Linker, Shredded Sports Science. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.